Hello and welcome to the latest session on the fourth day of the Festival of Marketing 2020, which continues our focus on strategy and leadership. My name is Russell Parsons, Editor-in-Chief of Marketing Week and Festival of Marketing, and it is my pleasure to be your host. Now, Mark Ritson has been writing a weekly column for Marketing Week for more than 10 years. Give or take, that's 520 odd columns, about 572,000 words, and a huge amount of insight. He's also raised his fair share of eyebrows over the years. You don't put yourself out there every week without ruffling a few feathers here and there. Now, today we're going to look back over some of his most significant columns to reflect and look forward. But it's not just two sad old men reminiscing, however. We've invited key figures from the subject of the columns to offer their riposte and reflections. Now, Mark has not been told which articles and who will feature, by the way, so you will see and hear his response to their counter live. Sound okay with you, Mark?
Oh, it sounds great, Russell. I'm looking forward to this. If there's any panting that you hear during this session, it's not me getting excited. My next door neighbor's dog, they've gone on holiday, and I've got my next door neighbor's dog, who's an idiot. My dogs are great. That sound you will hear occasionally is a big fat Labrador who just is super uncool. So the panting is me. I want to make that clear before that. Okay.
Good to know. Good to know. I've explained a lot of things away in my time. I've never ever had to issue a disclaimer about a panting dog. But anyway, let's crack on. First up, a 2018 column, which proved to be one of Mark's biggest and most controversial. An investigative tour de force where our intrepid reporter paid influencers to make a picture of his bottom go viral. Yes, you heard that right. All in pursuit of a serious point, however. Influencer marketing lacks credibility and can be easily manipulated. We'll get Mark's thoughts in a moment, but to our first guest, Australian TV presenter and owner of influencer agency Tribe, Jules Lund. Let's have a look at Jules's comments.
Mark Ritson, Jules Lund here, founder of Tribe, with a rebuttal to your article, How Influencers Made My Ass a Work of Art, where you accuse influencers of lacking credibility because they would recommend anything for cash, even your art, which later turned out to be a pixelated image of your ass. Brilliantly entertaining story, but it's below the belt and it has a crack in it. The first hole in your argument is that you actually paid influencers. Boomer. For some reason, you picked meme accounts that don't create their own content. They just repost other people's. So that could be anything from online deals to inspirational quotes to fluffy animal pictures. In fact, only one account could actually pass as an influencer who creates her own content, and that is from a Ukrainian student called Inna. But I'm not entirely sure how her credibility comes into question. I mean, did she knowingly post a pic of your ass to her followers for cash? No, you tricked her. You didn't tell any of the account holders because you knew that they would reject you because, they have credibility. Even without knowing it was your ass, nearly half of the accounts you offered cash to rejected your offer because they couldn't authentically say that they appreciate your art. Now, how many other media outlets would say no to placing an ad for cash? And yet they did. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that this one girl did actually know it was your ass. You assume that she couldn't possibly endorse it as a work of art. There is weirder stuff on the internet that people like, and some of them will even pay you for the pic. Plus, you're not even qualified to have an opinion on your ass. In fact, you're the only person on the planet we are 100% certain has never actually seen your ass in the flesh, unless you are very flexible. If anything, your article proved influencer marketing works because, wait for it, you are a marketing influencer paid to publish this content to your community. And it was so successful, we're still talking about it 2 years on. Standing ovation. It's just a shame that an influencer had to betray their own code of ethics just for engagement. And I'm not talking about Inna. But it's not the first time that you've engaged in fraud. Now, is it, Mark? This is your headshot at the base of a lot of your articles. You said you were inspired to write this article because it can. Unilever's Keith Weed, the world's most influential marketer, called for urgent action to rebuild trust in influencer marketing. You write, I find myself in violent agreement with Mr. Weed while shaking my head at the abject unlikelihood that anything will come of it. Yet something has. Unlike a media and marketing industry that is just riddled with complacency, the influencer marketing category suddenly transformed itself. So much so, you know the first thing Keith Weed did after retiring from Unilever? He invested in Tribe, and the influencer category he helped improve. So out of 10, I'm going to give your article a 3 for accuracy, but a 10 for clickbait. Keeping in mind that they're not mutually exclusive. Like if I was to tweak your headline a little to Professor sends nudes to Ukrainian student, it's both juicy and accurate. But I'll let you be the judge of that. Mark, is this headline 100% accurate? Yes or no?
I love that so much. We're up and running. Now, the man was asking you a direct question, Mark.
Too good. I mean, like, it is unfair to find the only intelligent person who works in influencer marketing in the shape of Jules Lund, who manages in that ridiculous video to, you know, deliver a huge promotional thing of his own company, make me out to be an influencer, and both agree and disagree with me. I don't know. I mean, what to say there? The one thing that rings true. I mean, so first, the column itself was a triumph because it got my ass into the mainstream, something I've wanted to do for a long time. And I was compared to the Kim Kardashian of marketing, briefly, very briefly. But he does make one very good point. He makes lots of entertaining points, but one very good point. And the one very good point, which did hit me at the time, was it did get my ass and the discussion. It did actually create a lot of sponsored content. And it did make me think at the time, yeah, I can kind of see why this influencer stuff does work. But you look at that league table one more time, and we did get them, whatever Jules says, the majority of those people did retweet a picture of my ass as a piece of fine art. And it does draw into question, you know, how legitimate and influencing media this really is. But Jules makes a couple of good points. At the end of the day, when we ran the numbers in the column on how much it cost and what it generated, and the results weren't bad, to be fair. My point was more that it doesn't have a lot of influence, but it does have apparently pretty good reach. And if you have the right content, it does have some impact. So I must admit, I walked away from my own column slightly less critical of influencer marketing, but much more enamored with my bottom than before I'd written it.
I don't know where to go with that, so I'm going to leave that particular column behind and move on to the next one. Now, purpose, I think it's sensible. Too much discussed about your arse. Now, brand purpose is a subject Mark returns to more than most. It's fair to say he's not a fan, or at least not a fan of the often vacuous, sometimes contradictory statements from overreaching companies. This 2019 column illustrates much of his thinking. To surmise, purpose needs to cost money, otherwise it's meaningless. To offer her retort, we've got Elena Santos, the Global Executive Vice President for Marketing at Unilever. Over to Elena for her
article,
thoughts.
you start by saying something like, a true brand purpose doesn't boost profit, it sacrifices it. Really? Do you believe in that, Mark? At Unilever, I don't think we are going to agree with you. I think that, even if we go back, in fact, at the beginning of the 19th century, Unilever launched our first brand, Sunlight, which was a soap brand with a purpose. And the purpose of that brand was to make cleanliness commonplace in Victorian England. And of course, many, many moons later, here we are at Unilever with 400 brands that are, shining in the marketplace. Many of our brands like Dove, Ben & Jerry's, Dirt is Good, Domestos, they crafted beautiful purposes that are relevant to our consumers, that are genuine and authentic to their brands. And those brands are outperforming the brands in our portfolio that didn't craft it and crack it, the brand purposes for themselves yet. So this is an evidence that we are seeing year on year. every time we are saying that our brands with purpose are really growing faster. So purpose is really paying off. But if you don't want to take my word on that, why don't you take Kantar and the Brand Z study that they conducted with more than 3,000 brands in different industries? There, what they found out is that brands with purpose have a very high correlation with brand power. And brand power being the measure of meaningfulness, differentiation, and salience. So very important metric. Also, what they found is that brand power correlates with market share growth. So actually, high brand power can even generate 5 times faster market share growth. So a very important study that correlates market share with brand power and with purpose. So amazing study. Everyone should have a read on that. So with all this evidence from Unilever and from outside Unilever, I have to say to you, Mark, I'm so sorry, but this time you got it wrong. I'm so sorry. One area that I think that you got it right, and I think that we are in 100% alignment, is when you call out the brands with empty and meaningless purpose statements and the brands that are not living up to the values they shout about in their comms. This is giving brand purpose a bad name and tarnishing our industry. There, yeah, I think we are 100% in agreement with you, my dear. So, well done.
The wonderful Eleni Santos there, partly agreeing with you, but taking issue in the sense that she made the case very strongly that purpose can boost profit, doesn't need to sacrifice. She didn't say on screen, but she did give you a score of 7 out of 10. Mark, your response to her?
Look, again, I mean, she's fantastic, and Unilever are one of the few real deal companies in the sense that on a corporate level and on a brand level, they really do walk the walk. So I'm not that surprised that she very nicely and elegantly sort of smashed me there. I think if the world was full of Unilever and Unilever brands, I think she would have a point and my column would be wrong. But I think the vast majority of brand purpose is vacuous and is empty and is very different from what the Unilever world looks like. And I think that's the key point, right? And she hits it on the head when she says, we have brand purpose that is, we do deliver on it. We are differentiated on it. It is what the customer wants. If you can tick those 3 boxes, and brands like Ben and Jerry's can, then amen to it. I think purpose is a great way to position a brand. The problem comes when the target customers don't give a shit, or the company really isn't delivering on it, or the competitor is doing it better than them. That I think then it's not the magic cure-all. When anyone tells you, if you don't do brand purpose, generally speaking in the world, your brand is fucked, something's wrong, because there aren't any blanket rules like that. So yeah, I think she's spot on, but I think she represents a big but relatively minuscule part of the world in Unilever. It's all the other banks and oil companies and machine gun manufacturers and cigarette manufacturers that all have terrific brand purpose that we also should refer to.
So purpose done properly, like Unilever, okay. It's just the rest and the majority of bad apples that give it all a bad name.
Yeah, and I still think that there's, I stole that idea that purpose must cost you from Patagonia, who are one of the few real deal players. And their point again is, it's great. It's a bonus score when we make a profit. But the point of purpose is we're doing it for the sake of purpose, not because it makes us more money. Otherwise, we're no different from the oil companies. You know what I mean? If your argument for it's kind of an atheist argument for being nice to people, the reason I don't believe in God, and the reason I'm nice to people is because I'm nice to people. I don't expect a reward. That's kind of the thing we look for purpose. If there's a reward behind it, then it's not purpose. It's venal to do it in the first place. Do you know what I mean? So I think there is a more complex argument there as well.
Now, let's take you all the way back to 2011 and an early take on social media, taking spots versus stripes. To those that don't remember, it was an execution of Cadbury's 2012 London Olympic sponsorship as a starting point. You argued social media lacks reach, distracts from crucial branding efforts, and is transient by nature. To offer his thoughts before I get yours, we've got Jerry Daking, who's now the EMEA Media Director at GSK. But back then, he was leading Cadbury's social media efforts for the Olympics. Let's have a look at what Jerry had to say.
Hi Mark, Jerry Dakin here at GSK these days. But I want to talk to you about an article you wrote a decade ago when I was at Cadbury. And in that article you asked, what if your customers are silent types? And I'd only been there a few months. I'd been a long time reader of the column, and it was a bit of a shocker for me to open it one week and find out that you'd used the entire column basically to talk about how misguided the Cadbury social approach was. But the only thing that kind of saved me was that I really agreed with a lot of your critique. I agreed with a lot of what you were saying. To be fair, in the PR, we'd overhyped it a little bit, and we'd said we were going all in on social when actually we had a lot of more traditional channels running as well. But the reality of those first 6 months or so when I was there was that I learned that a lot of the promises of social simply weren't true. This idea that, everything had changed, that consumers now wanted one-on-one relationships with every brand, that, we could forget traditional metrics and we should focus on engagement and followers and all these new exciting pieces. But on the front lines, you learn quite quickly that, yes, you can get people to have conversations with Cadbury, you can get people to play spots and stripes games, you can get them to enter competitions to win Olympic tickets. But it's a very small bubble of people that do that. It's not a mass scalable audience that you need for, frankly, any brand. And we also learned pretty quickly that none of those measures, engagement, followers, correlated with our business results. And Facebook and others have conclusively proven that that's true for just about every category you can mention. And instead we learned that if you applied a fairly traditional mindset, that you have great content, you have great paid media scale, that you have a big broad audience, those channels can work really hard and do work really hard for many, many marketers and brands. But if you come to a conference, if you take to a stage, if you hear people talking about social media, even a decade on, there's still an awful lot of chat about, beating the algorithm, chasing that engagement, trying to get that one-off Oreo viral tweet, even though that stuff really isn't how you best use those platforms. And you've been saying it for over a decade, and with the best will in the world, people do stop and listen to you, but they're clearly not paying enough attention. How do we get our industry to have this kind of grown-up discussion? How do we make sure that we approach new channels with kind of serious, sensible mindsets? And how do we stop us kind of getting bogged down in kind of crazy new ideas and bonkers snake oil and things that just don't work? How do we move the industry and its discussions forwards?
Over to you, Mark. He's asking you some pertinent questions and delivered in a very typically Jerry cerebral and sober way. I mean, how do we move on? It's 10 years ago, yet some of those issues, as Jerry agreed with you, still persist. I mean, how does social get to next to stage, and how do marketers get to the next stage in using it?
I mean, first of all, it is. I mean, I think we do need to rewind. I mean, it's a big question, right? I did at the time, and there's a lot of marketers I spoke to who are not old but not young either that I meet afterwards that have literally on more than one occasion bought me a beer since because of this, right? That when the world lost their shit around about 2010 and went banging on about social media was now, the new way of doing everything. And we did, if you're only about a 22 or 23-year-old marketer, you would have missed this. It was madness. And I'm going to give myself a bit of a go now, but I was one of the few people who thought, well, I might be wrong here, but this doesn't make any sense to me. The reach is just nonsense, right? And it's great Jerry says that, because at the time, Jerry was, a young, hot, social media executive, and there weren't enough people calling out the emperor's clothes. Now, what happened, of course, was social media, as we know it now, organic social media became digital media and became fantastically effective, at least at the same level as other media. But you've got to remember those first few, months and years around about 2012, everybody lost their shit. And I think that's important because we need to remember that nearly 10 years ago, how stupid everybody was and how everyone at every conference went on about it. To Jerry's point, what do we do now? Well, it's very hard because we established social media as this wonderful tool, and this myth that organic social media was going to build your brand. And I think, unfortunately, we can't go back with a time machine and change that now. I personally, the only thing I can suggest is you've got to draw a very thick line between social media and digital media. Even though they're kind of the same thing, they're not the same thing. And as Jerry says, using very traditional planning approaches and very traditional sort of media thinking, even though the vehicles themselves have changed to Instagram and so forth, is the right way to do it. The world didn't change as much as everybody told us in those marketing conferences a decade ago. And it's worth us remembering that. And it'll happen again, and it'll happen again, and it's going to happen again.
It never does it? I mean, you've written several times about how excited people get with the shiny new things in marketing, and it's usually proven, not necessarily you, but it's usually proven to be vastly overstated in terms of their use and value. But let's move on. Thank you for that, and thank you to Jerry. To DTC, direct to customer, which is often looked upon with awe nowadays by lots of marketers. The nimble, agile, and plucky upstarts, cumbersome FMCG giants should look towards for inspiration. Now, it's not necessarily the thought shared by you, Mark, who argued in this 2018 article just a couple of years ago that their value is vastly overstated at the expense of, quote, traditional businesses. To offer her thoughts, we've got Cheryl Carverley, who's the CEO of D2C brand Eve Sleep.
Hi, Mark. I'm Cheryl Calvey. I'm the CEO of a little sort of direct-to-consumer brand, as it's described, called Eve Sleep. Festival of Marketing asked me whether I had any views on some of the stuff you'd written about direct-to-consumer marketing and whether it was the panacea or indeed just a load of old codswallop. Indeed, I think you used some other terminology, but I'm not going to share them here. I always agree with a lot of what you say, and I think generally speaking, most of what you've written is right. Absolutely, there hasn't been some sort of panacea of the future of marketing discovered by direct-to-consumer brands. It is not going to change the way we market forever, and nor should it. But I do think there are some things that you've missed, which are fairly fundamental to direct-to-consumer. That means I think there are bigger changes afoot out the back of these businesses and brands than perhaps you acknowledge. I think it's about the DNA. I think about the DNA of these businesses. I've moved from big old FMCG to direct-to-consumer for exactly that reason, to try and understand what the difference is and learn. And when you get there's three things in the DNA of a D2C brand, which is, I think, fairly fundamental. The first is absolutely digital first in everything it does, from its product design to its naming to the way it looks at every aspect of its lifestyle. It thinks digital first. So, when we look at how a product looks, our first question is how will it look on a website, not how will it look in store. When we look at what we name a product, the first question is how will this work for SEO, not how will this resonate with the customer. So the digital first thinking is written right through the business, not just in a siloed marketing team or a digital team. The second thing is customer responsivity, as I like to call it. We're not just close to customers. Everyone talks about customer closeness. But at a D2C brand, we can be entirely responsive. Prices can change in a moment. Product descriptions can change and do change in a moment. And the team think about doing that all the time. It is the first instinct to change something, not the last instinct, which you resist doing. And the third thing, I think, is the biggest and most fundamental difference, which is lifetime value thinking. It's thinking in everything the business does about how it gathers customer data to be able to generate a whole lifetime value out of customers. Really weaving together the content, the CRM, all the touch points that a customer goes through to generate ever-increasing value out of that customer. And fundamentally, that creates a more efficient marketing machine and the ability to invest in marketing over the long term at a greater level. So I think you're right. D2C is not going to change the world. It's not going to turn everything on its head. But I do think there are some very serious skills inherently growing up in these businesses, which will change the way that the big guys need to look at things going forwards.
Qualified agreement, I think I'd class that as from Cheryl, who gave you a score of 8 out of 10. So quite a high mark. But what about the things she was saying about the value and virtues of D2C, Mark?
Oh, look, that was pretty good. I mean, I'm a fan of Cheryl. That was brilliantly put. I'm just not a fan of D2C. I think she should go back to FMCG in a senior role. I maintain what I said about DTC. Eve Sleep is not in a Cheryl is, she's fantastic, but Eve Sleep's not in a position to tell anyone about doing business. Eve Sleep did about what? And I'm pulling this out of my ass, right? About 25 million quid last year in revenues. Yeah, that's all right. It's very good. But it lost about 10 million quid at a profits warning, if I remember rightly, not that long ago. And my point is, again, this is one of the issues with D2C. Make some fucking money and then we'll talk about your amazing business model. But most of them don't. They're still crapping on about, razor companies that, Gillette's no magic bullet, but Gillette makes a shitload of profit. Most of these cool ass razor blade brands don't. Eve Sleep has never made a profit, right? Has never made a profit. Look, I can take my iPhone, right? And I can go out on the street and I can sell it for, I don't know, 30 quid and make revenue and lose money, right? How about that for D2C? That's what D2C brands do. They make revenue without making any money. Getting an iPhone that costs 500 quid and selling it for 800 quid, that's what these companies are able to do. And they're all in the same market. Sorry, I've got dogs. They're all in the same market, which is they're trying to be bought by someone big from a traditional business. And therefore they're talking a good show, but they're not making any money. And this is their problem, right? Lack of profitability. And the only ones that do get profitable by going into the major retailers, doing TV advertising. And what do you know? Before you know it, the only ones that are actually making money have got a completely non-D2C model. So I think Cheryl's fantastic, and I'm very grateful they're 8 out of 10. D2C, totally full of shit. Pull the other leg.
The man's not for turning, Cheryl. If only we had her here, we could continue this conversation. But alas, no. I mean, the only supplementary I've got for you, Mark, on this subject is how are they getting away with it then, for want of a better way of putting it? Because the investment keeps coming, the praise is showered upon them.
Yeah,
but the profits are not.
No, you're absolutely right, Russell. It's. I think the biggest two reasons: the pornography of change. So marketers would rather talk about, a brand new razor company that loses 50 million quid than talk about Gillette doing quite well for another quarter. And the other thing is most marketers don't know the difference between revenue and profit. Again, you can make 27 million quid in profit, then you can talk. But 27 million in revenue with a 10 million quid loss, it's not impressive. Profit is the thing we should set our stall on, not simply generating revenue. And until we do that, D2C looks quite good until you look at, are they making money? The fundamental premise of a business is to make a profit. And that's not happening in D2C very often.
Let's say amen to that and move on to the next one. Now, way back to 2012, an article on brand architecture, which is an often returned to subject for you, Mark, of course. Now, in particular, it was P&G who were the subject of this article, who were then shifting from a house of brands to an endorsement model, as you put it, where the P&G logo sits alongside each of its brands. Not a great idea, you argued, given the lack of equity in the P&G brand. The master of brand management now finds itself the novice. You concluded your article with that. Now, to reflect and respond, we have Catherine Newby-Grant, who's now the Vice President for Beauty Care for Northern Europe at P&G, and a P&G veteran for almost 20 years. Let's have a look at what Catherine had to say.
So my immediate response to Mark's 2012 column headline of "Does Procter & Gamble's House of Brands need major repairs?" would be yes, he was right. However, if you ask me whether our lackluster results were due to our house of brands versus a branded house, then I would strongly disagree. More on that later. What Mark was right about was that we were not winning in 2012 and major change was needed. Our portfolio had become too big and too varied over time. We had extended into areas away from P&G's core strengths, away from brands where R&D capability, product superiority and brand building mastery were the keys to success. So what did we do? In the years that followed Mark's piece, we executed the biggest portfolio transformation in our history, divesting pet care in 2014, specialty beauty in 2015, and Duracell in 2016. We focused and strengthened P&G's portfolio where product performance drives brand choice, and we transformed our own structures internally to become a more focused, agile and accountable organisation. Fast forward 8 years from Mark's piece, we have delivered 2 record-breaking years of growth, the last through a global crisis, and our share price is at an all-time high. Now back to our house of brands versus a branded house. I think the last years have shown that consumers want to know more about the company behind the brands they trust and buy, and they expect companies and brands to do more than just turn a profit. The days of an invisible parent company are over, and there is more place for both individual brand equities and the company behind those brands to have a voice. We have transformed our citizenship priorities, uniting our brands and using our voice and global reach to spark conversations, encourage positive change, and be a force for good, with campaigns like We See Equal, Love Over Bias, Take on Race, It's Our Planet, and Activate. Mark suggested using our house of brands was akin to taking a knife to a gunfight. I think our business results and the impact of our campaigns over the past decade show that Mark may have underestimated the strength of P&G, our brands, and most importantly, our incredible employees. So Mark, your 2012 column would score an 8 out of 10 for me. We weren't at our best, and as usual, you called us out on it. You were right that our house needed some urgent repairs. But perhaps in suggesting the master of brand management now finds itself the novice, you wrote us off a little too early. 8 years post-renovation, we are stronger than ever and ready to weather the storms ahead. Thank you, Mark, for 10 years of great insight, constructive criticism, and fabulous entertainment. Here's to many more.
This is sounding like an episode of This Is Your Life for anybody old enough to remember that show. Thank you. It's almost 10 years ago, and I saw you nodding enthusiastically, perhaps with some of what Catherine was saying. Do you have a different thought on P&G now in 2020 than you did then?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you don't mess with P&G, right? I mean, again, a little known fact is they literally invented brand management, right? So you have to doff your cap to them. I think Catherine and I both agreed at the time that they were on one of those cycles where they weren't doing as well as normal. And I think there's 2 things going on. I think one thing was they had too many brands, and then the other thing was they were messing around with, bringing the P&G brand into an endorsement role. 2 different architecture issues. I think the way they've killed and cut their brands is best practice. And then the way they've managed them since, particularly during COVID, has been out of this world. I mean, they've had a great year. And that's great. When P&G are at their best, you feel good about brand management because they are, the alpha and omega of brand management. I still don't think there's total clarity on how they're going to use the P&G master brand. There was a big push, remember, in 2012. P&G was one of the sponsors of the London Olympics. I still think that period was a little unclear for me. But yeah, no question, P&G are back. I think this is one of their finest years, and they've had many, many years, and many of them fine. I think the way they've handled COVID and invested is brilliant. And I think, I have to say she's right. They are still the masters of brand management, and I'm glad they are.
I'm sure she would agree with that. So let's move on now to a big subject, and one that you've written about several times during my time as editor, and perhaps previously to that as well. It's the subject brand valuation, and you've described it varyingly as bollocks over the years. I think your central reasoning is given the main protagonists into brand, Millward Brown and Brand Finance, differ so widely in their valuations that they can't be credible. To offer his retorts to one of your columns, we have the CEO of one of those 3 big valuation firms, David Haig, who's got a few thoughts on this column here.
Fantastic.
Hello, I'm David Haig, the founder and CEO of Brand Finance PLC. I've been a chartered accountant for over 40 years, and I met Mark Ritson 20 years ago when we lectured together on an LBS course about brand valuation. Mark is a great entertainer. he is fantastic at simplifying complex issues in an amusing and challenging way. Like Gordon Ramsay, he swears a lot, but makes people think. When I first met Mark, there were no brand valuation standards, just a plethora of proprietary techniques. Since then, we have developed accounting, reporting, and valuation standards which are now widely accepted. They allow for numerous different valuation approaches, methods, and assumptions when valuing brands, and as a result, for valid reasons, brand valuers will almost always arrive at different valuation opinions, just like valuers in every other asset class. However, Mark apparently thinks that every brand valuer should arrive at the same answer, and if they don't, then all brand valuations must be crap. He also thinks that public brand valuation standards must be wrong because the values of brands in balance sheets are often very low, which misses the point that CFOs have always undervalued and underreported brands. Most CFOs still don't really believe brands are assets and prefer to simply report goodwill as one blob. It also ignores the valid reasons why brand valuation assumptions and opinions differ, which is why Mark's 2015 article on brand valuation was interesting as always, but fundamentally flawed. However, as always, Mark started a debate which has been challenging, amusing, and ultimately helpful. So, Russell asked me to score Mark's article. I would say artistic merit 10, but sadly technical merit 2. So thank you. Good luck, Mark.
Now, the man likes your style, but not your substance, Mark. Now, for anybody who recalls, or for anybody who doesn't recall, Mark debated David and representatives from Interbrand and Millward Brown was 3, perhaps even 4 years ago at the Festival of Marketing, with the starting point. The question was, is brand valuation brilliant or bullshit? Now, I know which way David lands. Have you changed your thoughts at all, Mark, in those intervening years, or do you still think it's bullshit?
Well, still mostly bullshit. I mean, when we did that debate, it was me and David and the 2 other senior sort of valuation execs from the other 2 big firms. I remember the woman that was organizing the event at the time saying to me, but there's you and on one side, and there's the 3, valuation executives on the other. It doesn't seem fair. And I said, look, there's only 3 of them. We can't get any more. I appreciate it's going to be a bloodbath when I get at them, but and I did win that debate, and it's still available online. It's worth watching. Look, I think you've got to draw a line between these published league tables, which are total horse piss, right? I mean, David's right. I mean, valuation is fundamentally subjective. What I would pay for your house, Russell, is probably more or less than what you would pay for it. But within a remit of whatever you want to say, 20% fair value, whatever, we're talking about, infamous examples where, the difference in 2 of the firms' brand valuation for Google at one point was $100 billion, right? So more than the gross domestic product of Scotland. You know what I mean? It's gigantic, And so I do think the league tables are BS. That said, I've worked with David, funnily enough, on many jobs where he's come into a client I've been working with, and he's done a valuation with a lot of data and a lot of time and effort, and it's been fantastic because he's worked out the levers of value. It's got into the boardroom. So I do see value in that. Where I think the value is nonsensical is those league tables. But unfortunately, I've seen journalists for 20 years. You give a journalist a league table that says, Aston Martin is the number 1 brand and it's worth 10 times what Porsche's worth. And they go, I'll write that down. You give a journalist a league table and they take their clothes off and get all excited. And it's like, yes, but the league table is horseshit. Look at the numbers. So, yeah, I think there's value in valuation, especially with Mr. Haig doing it. But I think the league tables, and we'll never stop them being popular, are nonsensical.
I feel like I need to offer some sort of retort as a journalist for publishing the results of some of these brand valuation studies over the years. But this isn't
the problem.
This isn't about me. I agree. I find myself agreeing with him in terms of the credibility question. when marketers go into a boardroom to have valuation, for that to be underpinned by, well, you would disagree that they were robust, but there has to be some worth and some value to that for marketers.
Yeah, there does, but it's like me saying, looking like Brad Pitt will help me in my career. Well, shit, yeah, it will, but it's not true. And in the same way, I think the theory of brand valuation and CFOs going, oh, shit, my brand's worth $8 billion. I never knew. Now I'm going to respect marketing. It's one of those teenage marketing fantasies that never came true. Remember when I wrote the column, what happened that was fascinating afterwards was I said the only way we'll ever know if one of these three firms is getting it right is if we compare the stated values versus actual values paid. And a crazy Swiss firm went and did it for about 200 businesses. And all three firms were off by 300%. I mean, the winner was Millward Brown, and they were like as likely to get it 100% wrong as 100% right. You know what I mean? It was like bingo. And this Swiss firm had done all the hard work and gone, look, oh, shut up. Sorry, dogs again. If a brand is worth $12 billion in acquisition and we say it was worth $50 billion, it's clearly nonsense. So theory, love it. Practice, nah, still not buying it.
I think the Labrador was clearly, I don't know if it was agreeing with you or David Haig, but there was definitely a grumble, a growl of approval to somebody, or disapproval, I'm not sure. Anyway, moving on from Labrador.
Never look after someone else's dog. You feel like you're doing someone a favor. It's just stupid. Look at them. Stupid. My dogs are great until this big fat thing arrived. Sorry.
If anybody takes a takeaway from this whistle-stop tour through your 10 years at Marketing Week, maybe that should be it. Advice about dogs and keeping others and looking after other people's dogs. Anyway, moving on from dogs and brand valuation, I don't think any review of the last 10 years of your time at Marketing Week will be complete without a word from our fellow or your fellow professor, author of How Brands Grow, Byron Sharp. Now, the two of you have come to blows on targeting versus mass marketing several times over the years, most notably at the festival 2 years ago, where you debated on stage with him. Now, it prompted this follow-up article, the one that you can see in your screen now. Now, Byron has these thoughts about you.
Hey Byron, you've been asked to comment on this article that Mark Ritson wrote for the Festival of Marketing.
Mark Ritson, right. Well, I don't want to say anything mean.
No, I mean you wouldn't want to. He is a very good journalist, isn't he?
He's probably the best business journalist on the planet, I would think. He's really good at calling out the silly things that marketers do. He's not afraid to say the emperor has no clothes.
That's it. All Byron wanted to do was shower you with praise and garland your efforts over the years. I'm joking with you, of course. Of course, he couldn't rest there, and he went on to talk specifically about the article that we saw on screen a moment ago. So let's have a look at his actual take on targeting versus mass marketing.
So one topic that Mark professes to disagree with you still is, he says, I believe in segmentation, I believe in targeting, and to illustrate the point, he uses the example of the iPhone, which he says has a smallish proportion of total sales, but a high proportion of iPhone profits. Do you think the iPhone is a valid example of the virtue of targeting?
Well, I mean, all businesses target in the sense that they target their market, and Apple made a decision to be a profitable company and to only sell, profitable, higher end items. So, it's the same as a Sydney plumbing firm won't take orders from Perth because they don't supply the Perth market. But Apple has gone away from its super niche thing. I mean, they within the category they play in, with the products they have, they want to sell as much as possible. Right. And I think that's the key difference between the old textbook. The old textbook differentiation leads to find your segment and then position yourself narrowly in that view of the world, that thou shalt do that. Sophisticated mass marketing is more about realizing you can have quite broad appeal. You know, you sell ice cream, you can sell ice cream to all the people who buy ice cream, which is pretty much everyone. Even if you're selling more expensive ice cream, you're still pretty much selling to everyone. So it's not excluding, it's realizing you still do segmentation, you still understand the heterogeneity in the market. You know, you still understand that some people speak Spanish, and so your ads should be in Spanish for them. Some people speak English, your ads should be in English for them. You don't exclude, you don't go, oh, we sell vegetarian pizza, so we're only going to sell to vegetarians.
Now, Byron hasn't moved. How about you?
Yeah, I've moved a bit, but it still won't make him happy. So, first of all, so let's say it again, because I've given Byron a lot of well-intended shit over the years. Everyone's so afraid of him that I just feel necessary that I should not be and prick the balloon occasionally. But he is the great marketing thinker of our generation, and some of the calls he's made with Ehrenberg Bass are truly astounding. I mean, to bring in sophisticated mass marketing when literally we said, you know, if you don't target your segments, you're stupid. And for him to go completely 180 and then prove it is for the whole discipline is amazing. Similarly, to say, you know, differentiate or die was the book in 20 years ago, and now just go, well, actually, differentiation's overrated. It's a stunning series of empirical impact. So he is the big thinker, first of all, but there's still that tendency to promote the Bible, the Red Bible, at the expense of a little bit more nuance. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have moved in the sense that although I still believe in targeting segments, I certainly do, thanks to Byron and Ehrenberg Bass, appreciate more mass marketing, sophisticated mass marketing. But I've moved to a place where I believe both of them should be used. And I think that's partly down to me thinking about it, but also partly down to Byron and the brilliant work he's done. But yeah, should we completely adopt mass marketing? Definitely not. It's insane. But should we have it as our top of funnel brand building objective? Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I think that for me, that 2-speed approach where you hit the everyone in the market, sophisticated mass marketing with the brand message, but later on, when it comes to activation, performance marketing, bottom of funnel, whatever you call it, there is still a big place for taking a particular segment and targeting it. And I think the two can coexist together very nicely in a brand plan. But yeah, and by the way, when Byron says he's it's lovely of him to say, oh, he's probably the best business journalist in the world. That's not a compliment between professors with PhDs. That's Byron looking nice, but actually kicking me up the arse. And it's very well appreciated.
No, I'm going to continue the loving because I'm just going to let you know. When I went back to him and asked him for a score. Well, actually, you could look at this two ways. Mark used to say I was completely wrong, then just mostly wrong, now mostly correct. So he's moving in the right direction. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I give him an 8 for accuracy, which is kind of saying 8 because you now kind of agree with him in a way that you didn't. But I mean, what was evident in the festival debate 2 years ago was actually, yes, clearly there was a clear demarcation between what you thought about targeting and mass marketing, and a couple of other things around science and marketing. But I think for at least half of the time, if memory serves me correctly, you ended up agreeing and turning your ire against the audience on things like brand purpose. So you are closer, perhaps, than the starting point for that debate suggested, anyway.
No, we are, and there was a great moment where a bloke from Unilever stood up and disagreed with both of us. And I remember saying to him, "Jesus, you're a suicide pilot. What are you talking? What are you doing? We're both going to get you." But yeah, look, great thinker and not as dry. I mean, he's very dry because he's a Kiwi. He's lived in Adelaide. But he has a very good, wicked sense of humor that I think a lot of people miss, which is enjoyable. You know, he doesn't take himself, he takes himself quite seriously, but not completely seriously, which I do enjoy. And I do that was 8 out of 10 from Byron is like 9,000 from anyone else. So I'll take that one.
I'm sure he will as well. That's it from our guests. I just have a couple of additional questions for you. Now, it's a strange one for me as your editor to be asking you. Maybe you should be asking me. But my question for you is, have you ever written anything that you've regretted, that you've looked back on and thought, blimey, I got that totally wrong?
Yeah, I think I do that almost weekly with a sentence or two. When you publish them, I sort of read them, usually late at night, and I go, oh, fuck, I didn't like that. But there's a great story, and I forget the name of the artist, but there's a famous artist who tried to get back into the Louvre to adjust his paintings. Do you know what I mean? After they were already on display in the Louvre, and there's a sense of you've got to let them go, and once they're out, they're out. For me, the fascinating thing is the ones that I regret sometimes, or the ones I don't spend that much time on, actually become often the better and more resonant columns than the ones I work really hard at and then no one notices them. And there's a lesson there, I think. You know what I mean? Random, low effort, often with a bit of luck, beats doing a really good job, at least in the eye of the worker. You know.
And is there one that you look back on and think, boy, I did a good job there? That was a great one.
I really like the one where I shat all over the oil companies, because I'm pretty hardcore I've never voted. I don't really care. Other than animal rights, I've no real interest in anything that would be classed as cool or trendy. But I think there were some very good men and women who worked for the oil companies. Don't get me wrong, and I would always encourage those people to leave those companies immediately. I think that article we published, and credit to you, Russell, because you published it without blinking, pointing out that the oil companies are using marketing.
I blinked a lot, Mark. I just didn't. Not to you.
Yeah, but the oil companies use marketing to suggest they're green and suggest they're forward thinking, and it just buys them another 10 years to destroy the planet. Is something that really is true. And it's one thing to use marketing to present your better side, but it's another to deliberately obfuscate saving the world. And so I think that was one I was proud of, because my wife, who's a hippie and really doesn't either enjoy or really respect anything I do professionally, was like, oh yeah, that's actually surprisingly good for you. You know what I mean? She was momentarily impressed. So yeah, I think that was one I stand by. I didn't want to cause any grief to the men and women who work in marketing. I think it's their choice, and I don't want to be a prick about it. But I really felt like we did something important there, and we hopefully persuaded a few people that work in oil and gas to rethink it now, because I think it's an industry that's not good enough for them anymore. You know?
Do you think you did, or do you know that you did persuade them?
I don't know that I did. I certainly caused some grief to people. I mean, I get messages, right? I get quite a lot of messages often. I certainly got messages from either people telling me I was wrong, or people trying to lobby and explain the other side of the story, which I really wasn't in this case interested in at all. No, I don't know if we did change anyone. I tried to write I think an important point to make is, and I failed this test several times, there's an old football saying, you play, and it's sexist, so I apologize. It's about men, not just, it should be about men and women, but you play the ball, not the man. And I've tried to do that and make it clear it's not the marketeurs, but it's the thing that they're doing that may be wrong. And I was very careful with that one, partly because you don't want to make anyone the enemy, but also I wanted to encourage them to leave and not get tribal about it. So I don't know.
I think that's a good place to conclude this look back at 10 years and a little look forward to the next. So thank you very much, Mark. Now, out of a possible 70, if we add all of the scores together, you got 45. So more than half. So despite everything, and despite much of the counters to your columns that you've heard today, people have kind of come around basically to your way of thinking. So I think that's testament to them and indeed to your articles. Now, we will tweet out links to the articles shortly so you can see for yourself what's what. So please share your thoughts on what you have seen and what you have read. Now, Mark, it's been a total blast. Thank you very much for this. Thanks to you, to all of our guests, and for everybody that watched. So until the next session at Festival, goodbye.
Wait, Russell, wait. Thank you for publishing my columns for 10 years and never sending one of them back. He's never fucking said no. All the shit I've written about measuring penises and the oil firms, and here's a picture of my ass. There's a couple of things he's changed, but you've never said no, mate. So thank you for all of your patience over the last 10 years. I appreciate it, mate.
That's as perfect a final word as I could hope for, because it paints me in a really nice light. Thanks, Mark. Until next time.